A reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out of the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw descendants of Anak there." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, if we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw there are of great size. They are from the Nephilim. The Anakites came from Nephilim. And to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we also seemed to them." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Well, God, we've gathered in this sacred place today because there is something about the Spirit of your Son that has touched our lives and made us better because of it. So now may the words of our mouth be acceptable unto you. Amen. Well, it was early in the morning with the sun yet to rise, approximately 1,400 years before Christ was born. And 600,000 Israelites who had been migrating for about 40 years from Egypt to Canaan are now sitting on the cusp of their destiny, the promised land. But before they enter, Moses, their leader, decides to send 12 scouts into Canaan to explore the land and its people. After 40 days, the scouts return to report, and they're unanimous that the land was rich and productive, but beyond that, the scouts disagreed. 10 of the scouts say that the people of Canaan were huge giants who lived in fortified cities, and they were so very different from them, the Israelites, that they should not only be scared, but they should pack their things and go back the other way. But the other 2 scouts had a different report. They said, "Hey, look, we have nothing to fear. We've been there too. Let's enter into Canaan at once, for the Lord is with us. Why should we be afraid?" Then this great debate breaks out between these fearful scouts and the 2 confident scouts for all of the people to hear. Said the fearful scouts, "Look, you can't be serious. I mean, compared to those Canaanites, we seem to ourselves to be grasshoppers. And that's the way we appear to them as well." But the others say, "Hey, look. God called us here. We've been planning, we've been praying, we've been working, and if we've been called here, then why should we be afraid?" And that was the crux of the matter. The tribe of Israel, on the cusp of the promised land God had promised to them, was afraid to go in. Afraid of what they didn't know. Feeling like grasshoppers in the face of such a giant task that lie ahead. And it's true, I guess, that when our fears are large and we doubt the sufficiency of our primary resource, that we're grasshoppers for sure. Well, at least for me, this story from Numbers raises questions. It raises questions such as, so what challenges are we backing away from because we doubt we are adequate for the task? What would we attempt tomorrow if we were sure that God would help? If we had a bold idea that we believe God may have placed on our heart, would we be willing to act upon it, not tomorrow, but right now? Or another way to ask it, I guess, would be like this. Do we see ourselves as one of God's grasshoppers, small, insignificant, powerless, or do we see ourselves as one of God's giants, strong, confident, imbued with God's strength for good. Well, it was early in the morning, before the sun was yet to rise, 7 days ago, that 64 teenagers and leaders stood in a circle in our church's south parking lot on the cusp of a promise God had made to them. A call to go to North Carolina, to build and to teach and to share and model the love of Christ with many people they did not know. Like Moses, their leaders felt the need to send a few scouts ahead, which they did last winter, and they came back and they said, "We can do this." And why were they so confident, you may ask? They were so confident because they knew this group of young people, knowing that whatever the next week might bring, that these young ones had what they needed, not only to survive, but to thrive. Because the kind of young person a church like Community Church calls forth is very unique. They're very special. They're the kind of young person who, instead of being afraid of the stranger, is able to see the light of Christ in the other, which makes them a brother and a sister. They're the kind of young person who, instead of feeling a religious superiority to one who they don't know or who doesn't know or understand or who has chosen another way to worship God, instead of shunning them or saying they are going to be judged, they seek to find a common thread from which to be in relationship, to talk about the beautiful things of this world and the meaning God continues to give to all who seek. And the kind of young person who looks upon their life not as a loyal duty to keep God happy for all the things they say no to, which is how I was raised, but rather they see their life as a gift from God. And therefore, they embrace every day as an opportunity to return gratitude to the God who created them in the first place. Yes, I can tell you from experience that when you raise a young person with that kind of theology, it's not that they do not fear the unknown, but their durable faith allows them to surmount their fears and move ahead. So for the next few moments, we're going to listen to 4 of these young people who, along with 60 others, decided instead of staying here and being grasshoppers, slinking away from God's call, and not step forward into this unfamiliar land, instead, they decided to become giants, trusting that what they knew of God and of each other was that they could step out on faith and all would be well. And who knows, maybe, what these young ones have to say as the giants in our midst might inspire some of us who up to now have felt more comfortable being a grasshopper than a giant in God's world. Let's begin. It's okay. I'll just keep swimming.
Good morning, everyone. Captain John, ahoy. I'm sorry if I seem exhausted and a little crazy. I did just spend an entire week with Neil Watkins. Props to you, Pam. I don't know how you do it. In all seriousness, I did just get back from Whitaker's, North Carolina, my first ever mission trip, and I'm still trying to comprehend the epic week I just finished. Preparing for this trip, I was a little worried. For most of my friends, this was their 3rd or 4th mission trip, and it was only my first. I didn't know how I would fit in. Some of my best friends in the whole world were going on this trip, and I still didn't know how I would fit in. After 4 years of going on these trips, I imagined very tight cliques would have formed, and I would be seen as an outsider. I've been on big summer trips with other groups, and I can tell you all about social hierarchy. How groups form and isolate others, how where you sit on the bus determines how cool you are. And I've been on both sides of that social hierarchy, the isolator and the isolated. Going into this trip, I was thinking, where will I sit on the bus? And what if the others don't accept me? It's the small stuff like those things that worried me the most. Not how will I do without my parents or what everyday items I will miss, like my cell phone. It's amazing how much time I spent sweating the small stuff, because wow, that was wasted time. As soon as I got to the church at 5 o'clock on Sunday, I already felt welcome into the group. I was completely wrong about what I thought the people on the trip would be like. There was no hierarchy of bus seats. There were no pre-existing friend cliques, and there was no exclusion by anyone on this trip. The entire group is like one loving family, eager to accept anyone. I think the only reason people ate at certain tables was because there wasn't a table big enough to fit 60 people. Upon arriving at the Franklinton Center, we were immediately put to work to better the community. And let me tell you, with all the volunteering I've done over the years, the work I did on the mission trip has been the most rewarding. The moment that stands out the most was when my work group and I volunteered at a local food shelter in Whitakers, North Carolina, one of the poorest communities in the nation. Families of 4, who had an income of less than $10,000 a year, came in to get one bag of food that would have to last all week. The people of Whitakers lived in immense poverty, yet they seemed happy, because they were not alone. There was hope available in the form of a rundown old school turned into a food pantry. The ability to help people who don't have common necessities that we here take for granted was one of the most touching and humbling experiences of my life. The emotional roller coaster didn't stop once the volunteering was over. In the evenings, the group would meet in the auditorium for worship and activities that Neil found from God knows where. The band would play the cheesiest songs you could imagine, and we would all sing along. I was amazed that my friends, who wouldn't be caught dead expressing their faith in public, were clapping and singing along. The entire trip was a no judgment zone. I felt welcome to express myself, and trust me when I say that some of the stuff we did together can never be duplicated anywhere else, especially the communion on the last day at Whitakers. I had never seen anything like it. Teenagers sitting down one-on-one or in a group, speaking the truth and what we meant to each other. Tears flowed and emotions ran. I've never been so honest and so open with anyone before, even my friends that I've known since before I could tie my shoes. The entire group was together as one. Finally, there was a table that could fit 60 people. It's hard to put such a life-changing trip into such a short speech, which is why this goes over the war limit. Sorry, Neil. Upon getting home and reflecting about the trip, I came up with only one complaint. Why did I wait so long to go on a mission trip? I feel closer to my faith by seeing the power it has to change lives and create such strong bonds between strangers. The last week has been an emotional roller coaster that I would gladly get on again without so much as a second thought. Well, let me get some sleep first. I experienced so many life-changing experiences and am now a part of a community much tighter than any other community I can imagine.
Hi everyone, my name's Stephen Kroom. This year was my first mission trip and I didn't know what to expect, but I sure wasn't expecting the type of heat that the North Carolina summer had to offer. We got to Franklinton Center during the nighttime and it was still hot, but it really hit me the next day when we started to paint. Most other groups timed their painting areas during the times of day that they knew those places would be shady, but we didn't think that far ahead. The whole day we were painting in the blazing sun, up on scaffolding, getting the tops of the windows, and down on our knees, filling in the grout with brushes. Because of all this, a lot of my group members and I took extended breaks during that day, which limited our productivity. The next day we were up again, and this time we were working hard to build the foundation of a platform that we were donating to Franklinton Center at Bricks. After 2 double-sided 20-foot planks, I was ready to go jump in the pool and forget building this platform. But as I walked over to the water cooler and sat down for a drink, I was thinking about working for the next 5.5 hours on this summer day, and the thought made me cringe, but that was until I put it in perspective. What did this for me was when I thought back to middle school youth group in Winston, who's an amazing priest that came all the way here from Zambia. He was diagnosed with polio at age 2 and lost function in his legs. Here in America, polio is a very big deal and there's no cure for it, but you can be accepted by the community and there's much more helpful ways to deal with it here. But that wasn't the case in Zambia. He wasn't accepted by his community, and some thought him to be cursed by God. He struggled with depression and thoughts of suicide during most of his early life, but there was one night that God really spoke to him and called him to minister to the other people in need in Zambia. He responded to his calling, but not without the challenges of being confined to a wheelchair. The buses in Zambia don't have space or the equipment to handle handicapped people like Winston. So every Sunday, when he went to minister to the people, he would push his wheelchair 7 miles under the African sun, and after church, return those 7 miles back to his home. And for all of his work, all the church could afford to give him for his work was maybe 1 chicken a month, and sometimes he got nothing to feed his family. And here I was, dreading building a platform under only the North Carolina heat. It didn't take me long to change my attitude from, why should I do this? Why can't I just go jump in the pool? Why am I building this under the sun? Why can't I go sit in the shade too? Why not work as hard as I can for as long as I can to build this platform for these people in need of everything they can get? Because work like this is nothing compared to the sacrifice that Winston and anyone like him make just to help his family survive.
Good morning. I'm Alyssa Mata. When I was first asked to speak in front of church, my immediate answer was there's no way. Speaking in front of people brings that nauseating feeling to your stomach, and then your face gets red and your palms get sweaty. I think you know what I mean. Not that it would have mattered who asked me to speak, but I almost never say no to grown-ups. And I guess the ironic part of that was how I thought of Neil as a grown-up. But I realized I had a story to share. Before I left for the trip, I found myself completely lost, not knowing what I was supposed to be doing or who I was becoming. It was one of those times where you look back on everything that has gone on in the past couple years, dwelling on the mistakes and hard times. This year, for me to go on the mission trip seemed almost impossible, but there was a reason I was able to go, and I couldn't wait to find out. Throughout the trip, I connected with people I never expected to, and even the shortest conversation ended up being exactly what I needed. The second workday, my group was assigned to go off campus to a woman's house that had been in her family for about half a century and was neglected due to the family's financial situation. When we got to the house, we were greeted by the woman, Mrs. Peterson. First, we needed to cover the walls and ceilings with primer. As we began to paint, the ceiling started to fall apart. Everything we did that day seemed destructive to the house. When it came to be lunchtime, my group finally had time to be in the presence with Mrs. Peterson and hear her story. Imagine all the terrible things that happen to people and apply it to Mrs. Peterson. She had been abused. She went blind for 6 months, had cancer, and acquired infants and toddlers due to the deaths of people in her family, and that's not even half of it. What struck me the most was that her focus was not on the bad, and throughout it all, her faith became even stronger. After listening to her, we continued to work on the house, running into even more problems and putting the project behind schedule. We left that day feeling tired and defeated by the progress of the house. On Thursday, our last work day, a group of kids went to the Peterson house and were told that nobody could leave until it was finished. I was assigned to stay at Bricks, the place where we were staying, to finish up the work we were doing that week. By mid-morning, most of the work had been finished, and for a reason I couldn't explain, I was determined to get to the Peterson house. Now, I'm not the person that goes against what I'm supposed to do, and respecting adults is something I really value. Once again, I really don't tell adults no, but something about that day was different. I couldn't take no for an answer, and I didn't care what it took. I nagged the adults almost all morning, and eventually found a ride to Mrs. Peterson's house, along with Logan Martin. We pulled into the driveway of Mrs. Peterson's house, and I don't think I have ever been that excited to work in my life. The entire house was filled with energy, and every time you passed a room, you couldn't help but smile. Little by little, we completed different sections of the house. We ended up finishing early, but before we left, we gathered in Mrs. Peterson's kitchen to bless the house. Now when you pray, I know you're supposed to bow your head and close your eyes, but I couldn't take my eyes away from Mrs. Peterson. She stood there, surrounded by us all, praying to God with tears streaming down her face and the biggest smile I had ever seen, and she called us her angels. The morning we left Bricks, Mrs. Peterson was there to watch our bus drive away, but she gave us an unexpected gift. We got to listen to her speak, and she sent us off with a prayer. Again, she thanked us all for our work and told us that even though her siblings were angry with her for redoing the house, she was happy because she knew it was time to move on. She also brought along Maya, a 9-year-old girl who was unable to sleep in her own room after tragically losing several guardians in her young life. Seeing the both of them made me realize that there was a reason I fought to get to the house that last day and watch it transform from just a house to a home. Mrs. Peterson explained all the difficulties that happened in her life. She looked at them like a test from God, and everything good was a gift. For someone to be able to look at every positive thing as a blessing shows me that there is a reason to go on and have faith. The feeling I have of being lost is God's test to me, because God will never give us anything we can't handle. I heard God's voice in Mrs. Peterson. Remember how I said Mrs. Peterson called us our angels, or her angels? Well, that morning, by the magnolia tree, Mrs. Peterson standing there with Maya, telling us their plans to come to Vero Beach, I smiled, feeling assured that this would not be the last time seeing my angel. There was a reason I went back to that house, and the life I have ahead of me, which will be filled with tests from God, I'll hold my angel with me until we meet again.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, guys. Long time no see. My name is Preston Cooper, and I spent the past week on my first mission trip to Whitakers, North Carolina. Before the trip started, I was beyond skeptical about going. My family has never exactly been the church-going type. We're one of those annoying families that takes up parking spaces and available seating on Christmas and Easter. Religion has never exactly fit into my schedule, and I had developed this idea that it was too late for me to start a relationship with God. Basically, the idea of devoting an entire week of my summer to working in the hot sun for 6 hours a day, followed by praying to a God I wasn't even sure existed, made me want to run screaming for the hills. Did I mention Neil took our phones like 5 minutes into the bus ride? Talk about a teenager's nightmare. However, I'm standing in front of y'all today to tell you that this past week changed my life, and I'm so grateful for the chance to share my experiences with you. The theme of the week was opening yourself up to hearing different voices, and every morning we were given a new voice to listen to. Mondays was hearing your own voice, Tuesdays was hearing the voices around you, and Wednesdays was hearing God's voice. I'm by no means a morning person, so sitting under the magnolia tree in the center of the compound at 7 o'clock in the morning, willing my eyes to stay open and trying to process the devotion was nearly impossible. Miraculously, some of the message stuck with me, and throughout each day, I made a conscious effort to really listen to the voices around me. Monday's theme wasn't too difficult. I'm really good at listening to myself talk. Tuesday's message, however, is when I really started to feel myself change as a person. When we got to Bricks Center at Edgecombe County, we were divided into groups of about 9 or 10. There were several different projects we were going to work on throughout the week, and each group was assigned to a different project each day. On Tuesday, I went with a group to the Whitakers Public Library to work with kids ranging in age from 4 to 14 on a summer literacy program that was beginning its first week. I know this doesn't sound like much of a mission, going to hang out at an air-conditioned library all day while my peers worked in the sweltering 96-degree heat. But before this trip, I had been considering education as a potential career, so I knew as soon as I heard about this program, I had to be a part of it. As I learned on Monday night, more than 80% of kids in Edgecombe County are reading behind grade level. When we arrived, Miss Fran, the librarian, greeted all of us with a huge hug. She informed us that most of these kids were at this program not because their parents wanted them to read, but because they'd be getting free lunch, and for a lot of them, that was the only meal they were going to have all day. I've always loved interacting with little kids, and there's something about their ability to develop their own thoughts and opinions, and yet they're always willing to listen to someone else's ideas, something I believe many adults are incapable of doing. We had about 30 kids show up to the literacy program, and I was lucky enough to be with the first and second graders. But there were 2 7-year-old boys who impacted my life in ways they'll never even know. Q and Quay were identical twins, and the only way I could tell them apart was by the shoes they were wearing. The 3 of us spent the entire day together, from making name tags to reading them their favorite stories to teaching them how to play Foursquare. Those 2 never left my side. At 3:30, when my group boarded the bus to head back to Bricks, it was blatantly obvious that God's plan for me was to teach underprivileged children. Even though I didn't know it at the time, having reflected on it, I now know that every single one of those tiny voices was God telling me that educating the less fortunate was what I was put on this earth to do. When we got back to Bricks, I walked up to Neil and, with tears in my eyes, told him I knew with certainty what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Those 2 boys changed my life, and I'm so blessed to have met them. The last devotional was the hardest for me to embrace. A month ago, if someone had told me I should start listening for God's voice, I probably would have looked at them like they had 2 heads. However, by the end of this past week, I was hearing and seeing God in everyone and everything around me. Suddenly, I'm able to think about my future without having a nervous breakdown because I know I'm no longer facing it alone. When I volunteered to give this speech, Neil jokingly asked me what Bible verse I was going to address. I didn't know it was a joke at a time and thought seriously about backing out. But believe it or not, I have a verse I would like to share with y'all today. Proverbs 31:25 reads, "She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future." This mission trip gave me the strength I needed to open myself up to God's word, and now I can't wait to see what he has in store for me.
Homelessness and hunger, Iraq and Syria and Libya, homophobia, literacy. It goes on, doesn't it? All those things we read about in the newspaper, we see on television, we debate at dinner parties. And when we do, they seem so big. They seem so big that we feel like grasshoppers, do we not? And if you feel that way in the coming weeks, with all of the daunting things that we face in our world, I want you to think back on this morning and 4 of the 64 giants you have met who've said, yes, we may be fearful, but we know that God has brought us this far, and we know that God will not fail us the rest of the way. My prayer is that as adults, we might believe the same thing. Amen.